So before I start, I just wanted to make a little bit of a warning on my presentation, because it's not a lecture, and I really want to emphasize that. This is not based on any kind of solid theory or what at all, really. It's just some thoughts that we've been having inside Buro Happold regarding where we are in terms of sustainable urban development frameworks and whether they are useful or whether they are useful and implementable at the scale that is needed in order to achieve the sustainability targets at a global scale. And for us, the answer is no. And if it's no, then we should, or we must really review the trade-offs. Why are they not working? Why are we not really achieving sustainable urban development at a scale that makes a difference? So this presentation is only a thought-provoking debate about that. And please, as much as possible, if we can, I would like to open the door for questions. So if you want to ask something during the presentation, I'm more than happy for you to do so. So the introduction, I normally like to start about sustainable urban development, especially the frameworks, from the point of view of a mayor, right? Mayors are the ones that have to implement sustainable urban development, or at least they have the they have the power of decision making to do so, right? So being a mayor has never been easy, but I think it is getting harder and harder. And it is getting harder because our needs and aspirations are increasing, population in cities are increasing. Also, the sustainability is more and more expensive to implement. There is an increasing risk of extreme events that make it risky investment to invest in infrastructure, even if it is to prevent extreme events, still very risky and expensive. And also we have inherited a city that is actually increasingly expensive to maintain. So actually the endeavor of implementing sustainable urban development is very, very hard, right? So human needs and aspirations are increasing, so we need to expend even more money to meet those. We have less financial resources, so the mayor has less and less financial resources, especially in particular political environments. They lack the financial resources to implement sustainable urban development. There is an increased urgency due to climate change to do so, but they are kind of, and they cannot do it because they have some burdens, financial burdens. And there is more risk to invest in sustainable urban development because of it is more likely to be affected by extreme events. And since then becoming more expensive to maintain. So that makes the job of mayor very, very difficult. So I guess this is the research question, or I guess the debate that I want to throw is, can the current consensus around sustainable urban development help deliver sustainability at a sufficient speed and scale to achieve global sustainability targets? So in order to answer, or in order to open the debate, first I'm going to do just very quickly, what is Buro Happold's approach to sustainable urban development, and how do we actually try to implement sustainable urban development? And from that basis, I will just critique our approach. I will critique. He has a question. I will critique the consensus. Then I will go back to the key challenges of being a mayor. Talk about the importance of trade-offs in frameworks and how the frameworks are not addressing trade-offs, which are key, and what can we do after that. So I will propose some potential solutions that I would like to discuss with you. So sustainable urban development. At Buro Happold, the way that we do that we approach sustainable urban development, we call it integrated development strategies. And we start with a demand analysis. And I think that is incredibly important because a lot of the time we are planning cities or planning master plans within cities without actually understanding whether there is a demand or what kind of demand there is for that master plan. And that is crucial to understand how much development can I build in this master plan? Am I building too much, too little? What's the maximum density that I can implement? So what we look is population forecast, demographic forecast, economic forecast in terms of how much is the employment per sector going to be growing, and which eventually gives us the information on land use. So if I know how much employment per sector, how employment per sector is going to grow, then I know how much area per land use I need because I can convert it. I know, and then, so population will tell me how much residential I need to be providing in my area. And if you do it at the city, it's easy, right? You can actually do a forecast for a city. If it's only a master plan, what we normally do is what we call capture rates. And that is how much do we think the master plan can capture the growth of the whole city. If I can predict the whole city, if I can estimate how much growth that particular master plan is going to capture out of the total forecasted growth of the city, then I can use that data to inform my master plan. And that is actually absolutely critical, because otherwise we might be developing too much, which is very unsustainable. And another thing that really guides us on how much we can build is transport capacity. We shouldn't be building, maybe we have a lot of demand, but if the current transport capacity, or the one that we are planning, is insufficient to cope with the expected demand based on the land use that we're proposing, then that is definitely going to create problems. So that's another ceiling that we can use in order to understand how much development we want to plan for, and what kind of land uses. So in the end, after this exercise, we normally have a really good schedule of how much area per land use can we maximum plan for in the next 25 years, how much residential, how much transport do we need, and also the affordability, because we can look into like purchasing power per capita and how that is going to be evolving in the next 25 years, how much the demographics are going to be developing in the next 25 years, and we can plan for that. So doing this analysis at the outset of the plan is critical, because it really informs how much we plan, and it makes us respond more sustainably to the needs of the future. So again, is how much should I build is the question that this exercise is answering. The next one, spatial analysis. I mean, I think this one is very, very familiar to everyone, but we normally do it in two ways. So it's man-made systems and natural systems. So we do it that way because what we want to achieve with this is to understand where can we build. So the natural systems should not be touched. Some of them, the ones that we deem that are critical, should not be touched. So when we overlay all the critical natural systems on top of our map, and we identify which areas are actually developable, then I know how much demand I've got for, I can build for, and then I have all the areas that I can develop on. So I can then start understanding how to distribute the land uses on the areas that I know will not damage the ecosystems or the natural systems, right? So that becomes, so understanding the man-made system versus the natural systems becomes really important. Natural systems I talk about, for example, understanding what are the floodplains, or how in 1 in 100 or 1 in 500 year event, or understanding the topography, which areas we should be careful of building on, ecological networks or protected areas. I mean, this is only a few, but those are the ones that we need to overlay on top of our master plan before we start planning, because it will let us know which areas we absolutely should not be developing on, and that is critical for a sustainable urban development. The man-made systems are also the transport networks, the development areas, and the existing infrastructure. And that is also, we need to understand how that affects the ecosystem. So again, very important. So where should I build is critical question when we do sustainable urban development. The next one is understanding the sustainable infrastructure. And that is all about reducing the demand for water, energy, and the production of waste. And that lies at the core of the infrastructure the infrastructure strategy that you plan for. The infrastructure strategy is based on the demand analysis and the land uses that you have located on your plan, on your developable areas. So once you know how much you're building in terms of land uses and in terms of GFA, then you can then overlay an infrastructure strategy that responds to the demand that you have planned for. Again, doing that prevents you from investing too much on infrastructure too early, which has an impact on sustainability, because it's basically using municipal funds on something that is redundant and that could actually have been used for more sustainable uses. And also you can start thinking about how much you can put the sustainability through the infrastructure. And I want to be very clear. We know that we can achieve incredible results with the infrastructure, and I'm just going to put some examples. We know that we can actually reduce around 40 to 50, if not more, % on potable water consumption based on business as usual, just with a bit of with the adequate potable water system and recycling grey water system, right? We know we can do that, and using low cost fixtures or low consumption fixtures. We know that it is possible, and that is we're still at the beginning, and we know we can already reduce that much, so we know it works. And we've actually done it in many projects. And energy is even more than that. We can actually achieve net zero, which is literally zero energy that consumes carbon. We can do that. We know that it is possible. That is infrastructure. And that is understanding, passive solar design, the materiality of the buildings to ensure that they consume as little energy as possible, but also how much can we offset the energy production to renewable energies. So in total, we can actually reduce it massively. So we potentially actually heating and cooling your house could actually have zero effect on the environment. So we know we can do that. And waste, and this is actually the big forgotten element on most of the master plans, is waste and logistics. Waste and logistics has a huge impact on sustainable urban development. And normally people don't tend to forget it. And they plan without having that in mind. And then eventually what you have is what you encounter in most cities in the world, where you're walking and you find piles of rubbish, or from like construction sites, or from like the bar in front of the street. That is because they haven't really implemented a waste management strategy that works. But if you do, not only you can reduce the landfill, the waste that goes to landfill by, I would say, potentially 40%. But you can also reduce your waste. So you reduce the production of waste. So obviously that impacts landfill, but is slightly different. So one is sorting it and recycling, and the other one is reducing the consumption of waste. And that is very much possible. So we know that this works in terms of achieving our sustainable urban development goals. So how much can I reduce consumption of resources, right? Resource consumption. And the final one, again, I think this one is not really that forgotten, but it's hard to pinpoint, I think, to really have tangible results, right? Whereas with infrastructure, it's very easy. Like we just compare it to business as usual, before and after, and we can very clearly see what the effects are. With this one, is placemaking and healthy living is a bit more elusive, but it's still very important. I mean, we know that the environments that we live in, the urban environments we live in, are critical for our own sustainability, our sustainability of communities, right? I mean, a clear example would be living in a place where you have to take the car for everything, has a huge impact on your health system, because you increase the death by cardiovascular disease, for example. So that is already a huge impact on your society. But also, we also know that community ties, strong community ties, can actually make you live longer. And there are like very kind of empirically solid papers that talk about that. So actually, and we know that if we plan cities for more encounter, with more community spaces, those tend to help community ties and community networks. So we can actually design and plan for healthy living, or to reduce the externalities of a bad planned city. Again, so active mobility, community ties, recreation, and affordability. And affordability is something that is also very important. The demand analysis that we've done in terms of the economy needs to help us understand how can we plan a city that is affordable. And affordable in terms of also its infrastructure, not only is residential, which the market will eventually decide the majority of it, although you can control it. But mainly on, if you invest massively on infrastructure, you're going to be putting a burden on the future generations, and it might become very unaffordable to live in because of the cost that you've put in. So again, I want to talk about trade-offs. Of course, we want to have the best sustainable infrastructure ever, but do we think it's the best way forward if it makes it unaffordable for the majority of the city in the future? Those are the trade-offs that we need to be thinking about. At the moment, the whole thing, when we talk about, so who do we build for? And then phasing, sorry, this is the one I forgot. Phasing, I think everyone understands. Yeah, phasing in the investment based on demand, so making sure that we are phasing our strategy based on a demand forecast, and not investing blindly on infrastructure and development. But in general, these delivers, and we know it does. If we manage to implement all this, we know we have a sustainable urban development city, or a sustainable urban city. We know it works. So if it works, and we all know it works, and this is nothing new, like it's been around since the 90s, developed since the 90s. So why do we not have cities that implement all this already? We don't. So something is not right, because otherwise, if we've been like 20 years now in this, then we should already be on our way to have like very healthy and sustainable cities, but we don't. And the reason is that this is unaffordable for most cities, especially because we don't start from a white canvas, and also for all the reasons that I pointed before. Limited resources for implementation, increasing maintenance cost of the existing infrastructure of the city. A declining of purchasing power, that means that the municipal has less income to invest in infrastructure. Everything makes it really hard for cities to implement this. And yet, if I am a mayor and I hire someone, like me, for example, to help them develop a sustainable city, what do? I come with this. And that is the issue. It's the only existing framework that we have. So I come in and they say, please implement all this. This is the best, implement this. And he's not an expert, so he will try to do so, and he will fail. And that's what or either he will fail because obviously he will eventually run out of money or run out of, or he will not manage to do it at the scale of the city. So what he will do is take one single project and implement this in one project. And we've seen that, I've worked on many projects that deliver this, across the world, and they do deliver, and they're really good, but they're one project in the whole city, and they take 10 years. So the question is this enough? Is having a framework that really delivers enough? Well, we don't think so. I think we need a critique on the current consensus, on the current frameworks that talk about sustainable urban development. So, very quickly, we all know these kind of buzzwords of the compact city, the 15-minute city, the smart city, the green city, health city, all those, and also the sustainable development goals, LEED, BREEAM. We have, honestly, it is endless, the list. I had to put etc. because it's just not enough pages on this presentation to talk about all the frameworks that talk about all the best things about to achieve sustainable urban development. There is not one that talks about the trade-offs. There is not one that talks about what decisions is the mayor going to be faced when implementing sustainable urban development at a scale of the city or at the scale of a country, for example. That no one talks about that. No one talks about the implementation of it. So, for example, King's Cross. This is a project that Buro Happold did. I was involved in it in the very early stages. Honestly, it touches on every single point that a manual on sustainable urban development will tell you to do. Everything. It took years, decades to get developed. It's fantastic. Go there. It's amazing. I love it. But for every King's Cross, there is probably 100 or 200 of this in the UK that are completely unsustainable and don't match any of the sustainable urban development goals that we mentioned. And it's not because they don't know it, it's because they can't afford it. Or it's a developer or because the borough needs money and allows the developer to do whatever they want because they need housing, right? Or because they think this is the demand, right? So that is the issue. The issue is that it's not scalable, that we're not implementing those principles at the speed and a scale that can be meaningful. So it's what we call we have an acupuncture sustainable development, which is not enough, right? So, for example, that puts a challenge for us. We did a bit of work on London and trying to understand the growth of London and the needs of London. And what we discovered is that it's going to grow towards 13 million, and that 70% of the future residents will not be able to afford London. And that there is no way that the city can afford to develop all those housing for those people, which means that London is very likely to become completely unaffordable for the majority of people. That is where we are going towards. The effects of that, we're not sure. Whether is it going to be affecting the economy or is it just going to be like a city for the super rich, we don't know. But what we know is that with the current framework, with the current King's Cross, which took 10 years, I don't know, billions, but several millions of pounds to develop, but nothing else happening in the whole country, that's the model that we're going towards. So can we build a city at the scale and speed to make a difference? Being a mayor is hard. So I think I want to put another kind of horror story in front of you, and I think is that what happened to Detroit. I mean, I think you all understand what happened on Detroit, right? The huge decline. Detroit used to be one of the major metros in the US in the 1920s and 30s, like one of the biggest cities and more well-performing cities in the US, and wealthy and growing rapidly. And then they got a negative externality, so they were mainly on the automobile industry. As soon as that declined, population declined, and the result was a decline in bankruptcy of Detroit. And Detroit now is one of the most deprived cities in the whole USA. So it's not that once you achieve a level of development that is like high enough, you're safe. Not at all, actually. It depends on the investments that you do and how you manage those investments in a clever way that would prevent you from going into bankruptcy. But so I think the title of this is "What Happened to Detroit Can Happen to You" as a city. And the problem is that many of our cities are actually copying the Detroit model of like heavy infrastructure, like a development of huge infrastructure, low density, that is super hard to maintain. And to a certain extent, the cities now, when I say that cities are becoming harder to maintain or more expensive to maintain, is because we are reaching the end of the life cycle of most of the infrastructure that was actually put forward on the 60s and 70s, where they had this modernist approach of we need roads everywhere because the car is the future. And this infrastructure is actually going to an end, and we will need to decide whether we scrap it and build something new that is more adapted to what we want, but obviously at a cost, or whether we keep on maintaining it and refurbishing. And again, doing one or the other has incredible consequences for sustainable urban development and for the future of most cities in Europe and the US and Turkey as well. There is also a huge risk, and is that there is a divergence between the cost and quality of living and the purchasing power. So there is costlier and costlier to achieve a high quality of living in terms of investment, but at the same time, the purchasing power, the average purchasing power of people in most of developed cities are stagnating. So they're still growing, but not at the same speed that the cost of living is rising. So in order to maintain the quality of living, investment needs to happen. But if the purchasing power is not growing as fast, it means that you're not going to get enough income as a municipality to invest in that quality of living. So again, this requires us to question whether we need to rethink our quality of life and whether we need to be a bit more frugal in what we deem to be quality of life. What I mean by that is when you see these images of like an amazing pedestrian road with sustainable drainage everywhere and everyone is really happy, that is incredibly expensive. And we don't know who is going to be covering that cost. So again, if we want, we need to rethink what is our ultimate goal of sustainability, because it might not be reachable, it might not be possible. And then finally is this idea that whether we like it or not, the urbanization is happening. So there is kind of an opportunity, like we have a bit of an opportunity to manage that, but again, most of the cities, they don't know how to. Like if you already imagine just with Istanbul, in order to make Istanbul sustainable, like apply all the sustainable development goals only in Istanbul will be a challenge. If you think about all the intermediate cities that are growing because of urban rural migration or because of people like migrating to cities for whatever reason, which sometimes is actually more a push than a pull. So it's not because they're great, it's because they are better than where they are currently. Then you think that the challenge is absolutely immense to achieve sustainable urban development, especially if we conceive it as we currently conceive it, as something that needs to tick every single box. So I think we need to rethink what is sustainable urban development, what is achievable, and that's where I'm going to go now. This is only a proposition, by the way. I'm happy to criticize it. I mean, there is no much value than just like thinking about elements that could make it more frugal and change our idea of what sustainable urban development is. The first one is the right thing in the right place. This idea of like making sure that you're not building in areas that are going to be impacted by catastrophes, or as much as you can, of course. I mean, we all know Hatay is already there, so we're going to be reconstructing. But in the future cities, I try to like place it in areas that are not subjected to external events. Climate retreat. Sometimes we try to do climate adaptation in terms of, we invest millions on trying to prevent, for example, sea level rise to continue. But sometimes the best thing to do is to retreat. And sometimes we need to accept that because the cost of adaptation is absolutely huge. So, and by the way, this doesn't mean that like we do that every time. It's just that sometimes we need to consider that the best action at a scale is potentially not to adapt, but to retreat. Cars autonomous cars is not solving our walkability problem. That is, I think, for me, a critical issue as well. We're going full on autonomous car, but if we don't change the way, if we don't reduce the amount of car we use, then we're not solving any problem. And also, we're investing massive amount of research on autonomous car, on developing the autonomous car, but in reality, it's not really solving the issue of sustainable urban development. Only the pollution that it emits, but not the more kind of the deeper consequences of using the car all the time. And walked on. I mean, this is. I think we will all agree that investing in walkability is a lot less expensive than public transport. So if we plan our cities to be walkable, everyone knows this. I mean, I'm not inventing anything. I'm just trying to analyze them from a point of view that to reduce the cost of investment so they can be scaled up at the scale of the city. So if we do design our cities in a walkable manner, that really, the cost is a fraction of investing in public transport or investing in new roads, and they can adapt and they can move to adapt to new kind of economic cycles. Then I think it will be more sustainable, and it also will reduce the cost significantly. What is not in here that I think I should have actually included is the retrofit. Like retrofitting buildings as much as possible if the cost of doing so and the sustainability of doing so makes sense, rather than building anew. Embrace hybrid and virtual, so we don't put so much stress on public transport and mobility within our cities, and reuse and double up, so trying to reuse the existing network as much as possible. Those are just some things this idea of more frugal sustainable urban development so it can be scaled up is kind of the message, more than these ones, which I'm sure we can think of better ones, but the concept is more, can we think about sustainable urban development in a more frugal way that doesn't really entail a huge amount of money just to build and to maintain for the future generations. So I guess we need a sustainable urban development at scale, but mindful of the cost and burden it might leave to future generations, and adaptable to demographic and economic changes. So where do we go from here? I think for me the important things are the trade-offs. And going back to the mayor, what he needs is not someone that tells him, please implement this is the best of the best, and this performs well, we know it, we've tested and it works. But someone that really sits down with him and trying to explain what trade-offs is he going to be facing. What decisions do you need to make now? What are decisions that the mayor has to make, but we can inform them on the consequences of the decision, so he's well informed. And the alternatives to what everyone else, or maybe even himself, have been seeing everywhere, right? When you just type sustainable urban development on Google, you will see that all the images actually resemble each other. And those are extremely costly infrastructure that are not scalable. So even himself would be predisposed to kind of implement things that kind of resemble the consensus. But I think now our point or our mission, I would say, is to rethink what that is, and then trying to advise him on doing something that is more impactful and scalable. And I think that is meaningful. It's not about cutting ribbons on an amazing new development. It's actually trying to achieve our sustainability targets. This is just you don't need to do everything, just choose the ones that are more important to you, the ones that are more impactful for your city, and focus on those. And then finally, I think this one is a must before we leave, is how do we apply this to the reconstruction framework? And the same applies to the reconstruction frameworks that we've been looking at in the Hatay project. Most of those frameworks, they tell you exactly the best out of the best of the best of the best, but none of them, and I've been looking, none of them talk about the trade-offs, and none of them are, in my opinion, a useful guide for any municipality that needs to act straight after a catastrophe. It's just not useful, because they will not know where to start. They're telling them to do everything. And I think what we should be doing is trying to work with them to develop strategies that really think about what is the immediate need now. What do we need to do now in the next weeks? What do we need to do next months, next years? And focus on what matters. And again, I'm going to put it in context. This idea of trade-offs are different in different contexts. In Hatay, it might be prompt relocation of the displaced population. How quickly can we bring the people back that are currently displaced? Or integrate solid, resilient and emerging response principles. So when this happens again, then you're better prepared and it's less damaging to people and to the urban infrastructure. And then on the second hand, then improve the urban resilience and improve the urban infrastructure. But if we look at Ukraine, then those might not be the priorities. This might be completely different priorities. And the priorities might be like the tactical reconstruction against risk of destruction. They're still at war. I do believe that we need to start reconstruction now, but the priorities will not be to relocate the people. Maybe not even building or rebuilding the Kiev, because it is very likely that it's going to get bombed. Or it is the most likely target, I would say. So maybe it is a different strategy, and it might be that we need to think about reconstructing Ukraine in a very different way that we're thinking Hatay. And I think that is what we need to be telling the municipalities with them, is what do you think matters now, and let's focus on what matters, so we can be impactful. Because otherwise, it's completely pointless. It's people talking about how good we are, that we've invented an amazing framework that no one can implement. It's completely is a waste of time, in my opinion. So I think not many people are talking about this, but I urge you to discuss this in academia if you are in academia, or at work if you're at work, and try to be a lot more critical about the current frameworks and how we implement them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
My pleasure.
Sure.
Thank you. I'm a little bit late, but I'm really interested in post-disaster cities, Ukraine and Hatay comparison, but also I saw your work on Gaza. What do you think, is there any difference when you compare Ukraine and Gaza? Gaza, maybe in English better.
Well, the work that we did was a high-level analysis on how to recover economically in Gaza, so only looking at economic recovery. It wasn't like a strategic reconstruction plan. So it didn't look at the trade-offs of what to do first. It just looked at what's possible. So it's slightly different in that sense. But I think the Gaza is not much. I don't think it is very much different from Ukraine. I think you probably have the same trade-offs. They're still bombing Gaza massively, and I think the reconstruct. If anything, it will be even harder to reconstruct because the violence with which the Gaza has been bombed is even worse than the one happening in Ukraine, in my opinion, from my sources. So the reconstruction is going to be harder because it is just really nothing there. And this is what really shocks me, is that they've really destroyed the whole this whole area. So the reconstruction is going to be probably one of the most challenging ones that anyone has ever done. Also because the Israeli government is not going to allow you to do so. They don't want to reconstruct, and they are going to do anything in their power not to. And in here, since you touched the subject, I don't want to be politically correct. I really think it's a genocide, and I would never. I'm not going to back down from defending the rights of Gaza currently and the Palestinian people. So I think it is going to be incredibly challenging, but also a challenge that we should definitely face forward and without fear, but knowing that it's going to be very, very challenging.
And the second one is, what do you think about our society? Because in architecture society or designers, are we really resilient? Because we are talking about urban resilience, infrastructural resilience, but what do you think about architectural society? Are they resilient? After what we did in Hatay, we saw that architects, is really hard to organize them to work together.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the strategy for Hatay was the right one, because it is very hard to organize architects, and they tend to look at things from an aesthetic perspective or design perspective. But I think that is very much needed, and especially in Hatay, because if I start speaking about infrastructure to the currently displaced population, that I'm not going to reach them. They're not going to want to come back. We need to really show them what's possible. And I think this time it is possible. And I know that I have been criticizing the fact that we only do like aquaculture, but the pilot project area is the model for the rest of Hatay. So it's not an aquaculture project. the quality that we're doing at the pilot project area will be replicated everywhere in the city. And I think that's why it's very important to showcase what it would be to live there. And I don't think anyone but architects can do that. They are the best at showing the future and what can be. And I think in that sense, it is very hard to organize them, and especially when you have that many of them, and they tend to be quite egocentric, and they tend to they love their work too much. But I think they are incredibly important in reconstruction projects.
Firstly, thank you for you and for your work at Hatay. My question is very basic. What is urbanism for you?
Urbanism?
Yes, for you. Like in your mind, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think urbanism is a very broad term, and to be honest, even everything surrounding urbanism is very broad, and people have different approaches to it. I mean, if you ask whether urbanism and urban design is the same thing, or whether urban planning and urban design is the same thing, sometimes they are interchangeable. Sometimes I speak about people that are doing true planning and they think they're doing urban design. I mean, and I don't think they might not even be wrong, but I think it's kind of very, very fluid. For me, urbanism is just is the science, is the activity of thinking about the future of cities in a way that is that mixes the spatial elements of the city with the economic and social forecast that predict how the city is going to grow in the future. I think for me that would be like the most approximate definition that I could say. But within that there is much more. Within that you have infrastructure, you have architecture, you have design, you have But if you just talk about urbanism, it's about thinking about the future of the city, how the future of the city, based on forecast and predictions, will affect the current spatial structure of the city. For me, that would be urbanism.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for the conference.
My pleasure.
My question is about the space. What do you think about the new space cities and colonies? Do you have any specific vision? Thanks.
Sorry, for a space for...
For example, moon colonies at the future.
Oh, in space?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I say space, okay. Wow. It would be very challenging to make it sustainable, that's for sure, and very costly. I think that we should probably focus on our cities, which need it most. If eventually someone wants to design something in space, then go ahead. I might not be alive by the time they do so, though.
Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you for the presentation.
My pleasure.
You mentioned community ties as a kind of healthy living, and I do believe that for resiliency we need to strengthen these community ties. However, I couldn't get how you project the urban planning or design. How do you put them together? I would like to hear more about it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think it's very important. And there is a lot of literature on it, and it's nothing new. I think I would say there is a bit of a tension when people look at community ties between how much the spatial structure affects community ties and what other external factors also affect that. And I think it's not one or the other. I think it needs to be a mixture. But indeed, the way you design spaces definitely affect how you relate with your neighborhoods and how much you relate with them. But I think it's not only that. For example, you might be living like in a place designed for interaction with your neighborhoods, but if you work 24/7, to sustain your family, it's very unlikely you can have any community ties. So I think it's always a mixture between external factors or socioeconomic factors and the space. The space is kind of a must, so we absolutely need to be designing for strengthening community connections. But let's not be foolish. I mean, at the same time, most of the advances on technology is actually taking time away from us, from socializing with people to be consuming. How much, I mean, now the latest is kind of the Instagram. Like, it's taking me time at home when I should be with my kids, and I'm actually scrolling. Like, this is how can we speak about like community ties when we are continuously on our phone? I mean, I'm not saying you can have community ties like virtual ones, but those are not the ones we're talking about. So I think that we absolutely need to design cities to enhance community connections, but I think we shouldn't be foolish to think that those will be enough.
Thank you for your presentation. When talking about ecological urbanism, resilient cities, I'm always thinking about industrial cities, which is really hard to manage them, and it's important for economical part of the city. So we can move them, we cannot reconstruct them, but we know there's lots of pollutions maybe there. What are the strategies to deal with them?
Fantastic question. That's great. And actually, I haven't really talked about industrial that much, but it's very important for sustainable urban development. I think that we should be very careful. A lot of the times we tend to, again, the frameworks would tell us that brownfield redevelopment in cities is good. You know, we then decontaminate and we develop something that, you know, regenerates, and it could be very sustainable. But I mean, there is a story in London that one project actually wanted to take out one big warehouse in the middle of London to develop it into like the most amazing new development, and they just realized that it was actually the main network where all the meat in London was distributed from ancient times and still now. So obviously, you know, if it is like a derelict industry or an industry that is no longer in use, fantastic. But if it is in use, I think we need to be very careful about relocating them. Of course, if they are if they're polluting a lot, we absolutely need to address that, because we can. I mean, of course, cities are polluting a lot, but they are polluting a lot not only within it, but also within the external externalities that make the city function. So all the industry that is not collocated in the city is contributing massively to the carbon emissions related to urban living, and those will absolutely need to target. And it's very difficult because normally the big industrial states tend to have like quite a lot of power, political leverage, because they produce jobs, because they produce economic activity. So if you're a mayor and you have to tell them that they need to spend I don't know how many billions on the new filtration system, you might get some opposition. And if you don't have a strong government, then you might not be able to implement it. So, very, very interesting question, and I think that we absolutely need to address that problem.
Thank you so much for the. Thank you so much for the great presentation, and you all for the questions and the contribution to the discussions. As Türkiye Design Council, we are honored to have you here with the great topic on the sustainable urban development. We are looking forward to meet you all again here and maybe in other discussions. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you.